Ego stared out the window of the old bus as it bumped along the lonely road. The night was dark and quiet, with only the chirping of crickets in the air. She was going to her village to stay with her mother because her husband was away for work. Her hand rested on her round belly. The baby inside her kicked softly, as if sensing her worry. Suddenly, the bus screeched to a halt, and Ego felt her heart leap into her throat. Something was very wrong. Welcome to Royal Beat Tales, a home of interesting stories. Bang! Loud gunshots rang out in the dark. Armed men surrounded the bus, shouting angrily. Ego's blood turned cold when she heard someone cry, "Fulani kidnappers!" Panic exploded in the bus. Passengers screamed and pushed to get out. They ran into the bushes, disappearing into the night. Ego tried to run too, but her big belly made her slow. Before she could escape, rough hands grabbed her from behind. She kicked and screamed, but the men were too strong. They dragged her away from the bus as she cried for help. The forest grew eerily silent as the other passengers vanished, and the darkness swallowed Ego's screams. Ego stumbled over roots and stones as the kidnappers pulled her deeper into the forest. The air was damp and filled with the smell of wet leaves. It was hard for her to walk. Her legs were weak and her body felt heavy because of the baby. She begged them in a trembling voice to let her go. "Please, I'm pregnant. I'm so tired," she cried, tears rolling down her cheeks. But the men only laughed cruelly or ignored her. Branches slapped her face and arms as they forced her along. In the distance, through the tangled trees, Ego saw a dim orange light flickering. It looked like a small campfire. Fear prickled her skin as they marched her toward it. They were taking her to their hidden camp, and she did not know what new horror was waiting for her there. At the kidnappers' camp, Ego saw a terrible sight. A few other people were there, tied tightly to tree trunks with ropes. Their faces were dirty and wet with tears. Some looked hurt and very weak, barely able to lift their heads. The kidnappers shoved Ego to the ground and tied her hands together. She was so exhausted that she could hardly sit up. Ego's whole body ached, and her heart was pounding fast. She thought of her mother waiting for her, and her husband who was far away, and she sobbed loudly. "Please, let me rest. My baby," she moaned. But only the silent trees listened. The kidnappers moved away to talk in low voices, ignoring her cries. Ego's head swam with dizziness. She hadn't eaten or drunk water in hours. Her sight became blurry, and the world started to spin. With a soft gasp, Ego collapsed onto the cold ground. Her eyes closed, her body went limp, and everything turned black and silent. Ego lay unmoving in the dirt, as still as a rag doll. One of the kidnappers walked over and nudged Ego with his boot. She didn't stir at all. He bent down and placed 2 fingers on her neck to feel for a pulse. Nothing. "This one is dead," he grumbled to the others. The men cursed under their breath. A pregnant woman dying on them was not part of their plan. They gathered around Ego's motionless body, uneasy. In their culture, it was forbidden to bury a woman with her unborn baby still inside her, but the kidnappers were in a hurry and did not care about any taboo. "We can't just leave her here," one said. Quickly, they decided to hide what happened. 2 of the men took shovels and dug a shallow grave in the soft earth right there in the forest. They lifted Ego's lifeless body and placed her in the hole without ceremony. They did not bother to separate her unborn child from her. They just wanted to be done with it. The kidnappers covered Ego with dirt hastily, patting the soil down to conceal the grave. In minutes it was over. The forest was quiet, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the night breeze. The men stepped away from the fresh mound of earth, eager to leave that spot. They hurried back toward their fire, unaware that Ego's story was far from over. That night, the kidnappers sat around their small, flickering fire. They spoke in low, nervous voices. The darkness pressed in on them from all sides. They tried to act tough, But each man felt a prick of fear he couldn't shake. The forest was too silent. No insects chirped now. It was as if the woods were holding its breath. One kidnapper poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks swirling upward. Suddenly, a soft sound floated through the trees. It was faint at first, like a whimper. Then it grew into a gentle cry. A baby's cry. The men froze and their blood ran cold. "Do you hear that?" one whispered, his eyes wide. The eerie crying sound echoed through the dark forest again. There were no houses or villages nearby. No real baby could be out here at this time. The cry came again, louder and more insistent, a sad wail that made the hairs on their arms stand up. The leader of the kidnappers jumped to his feet, clutching his gun. His heart thudded in his chest as he remembered the pregnant woman they had just buried. The others scrambled up too, shining their flashlights into the black trees. Shadows danced, and the crying turned into a haunting wail that surrounded them. The kidnappers huddled together, fear gripping their hearts. They realized something was terribly wrong, and they were not alone in the darkness. From the shadows beyond the firelight, a figure appeared without a sound. The kidnappers stared in disbelief and horror. It was a woman, her clothes dirty and torn. Her face was deathly pale, and her eyes looked like white clouds with no pupils. Clumps of wet soil clung to her skin and hair. Ego. It was Ego standing there among the trees, even though they knew she was dead and buried. She looked straight at the men who had dragged her and hurt her. In her arms, she seemed to be holding something close to her chest. One kidnapper lifted a shaking flashlight towards her and saw a tiny bundle glowing with a soft light in Ego's arms. It looked like a baby made of pale smoke, with eyes closed in eternal sleep. The ghost of Ego's unborn child rested in its mother's ghostly embrace. Ego's spirit had returned, and her baby's spirit was with her. The kidnappers could not believe their eyes. "This can't be real," one whimpered, stumbling back. His hands trembled as he raised his gun. With a panicked shout, he pulled the trigger and fired straight at the ghostly woman. The bullet passed right through Ego's figure, as if she were made of mist, and struck a tree behind her. Ego did not flinch. She kept coming closer, her feet barely touching the ground. The men felt a wave of cold wash over them as she approached. Ego's mouth opened, and she let out a soft, sad whisper. "You buried us." Her ghostly voice sighed, echoing like the wind. The kidnapper who fired the gun suddenly gasped for air. He clutched his throat as an icy grip tightened around him, though no one was touching him. His eyes bulged in terror. In seconds, he collapsed to the ground, lifeless. The other men screamed in fear as their friend fell. They realized with dawning horror that the vengeful spirit of the mother and child had come for them. Chaos broke loose as the remaining kidnappers tried to flee. One man turned and ran blindly into the trees, branches whipping at his face. But he hadn't gone far when a white shape appeared in front of him, gliding out from behind a tree. It was Ego's ghost, moving impossibly fast. The man tripped with a cry, falling to the ground. He felt an icy hand grab his ankle and drag him backward. His screams echoed in the night, then stopped all at once. Back at the camp, the last two kidnappers were shaking with terror. One fell to his knees, begging, "Please forgive me, I'm sorry." Tears streamed down his face. Ego's spirit floated toward him, her dead eyes staring. Beside her, the faint outline of the little baby's spirit seemed to stare at the man too. The begging kidnapper's pleas turned into shrieks as the ghost reached for him. The wind howled through the clearing, and the man's screams suddenly fell silent. Now only one kidnapper remained, the leader. He stood frozen, his mind racing. He watched in horror as Ego's ghost gently laid the tiny baby spirit on the ground and then stretched out both arms toward him. The leader backed away slowly, his whole body trembling. This ghostly mother intended to make him pay. His courage broke and he bolted into the dark forest, running for his life. He didn't dare look back. He could almost feel the cold breath of the ghost at his neck as he crashed through the bushes. He ran and ran, heart pounding, with terror chasing at his heels. The last kidnapper ran until his legs almost gave out. Thorns and branches slashed at his clothes and skin. But he ignored the pain. He just needed to get away from that horror behind him. The forest seemed endless as he pushed through tangles of shrubs. Hours passed as he stumbled onward in the dark, fear giving him strength to keep moving. Finally, just as dawn's gray light crept into the sky, he burst out of the thick woods onto a lonely road. By pure luck, a police patrol van was driving by at that very moment. The kidnapper waved his arms and fell to his knees in front of the van, sobbing uncontrollably. The officers jumped out and pointed their guns, thinking he might be dangerous. But they quickly saw he was unarmed and terrified. "Help me! Please help!" the man cried. He was trembling from head to toe and could barely speak clearly. Between frantic breaths, he told the police about the camp, the hostages, and the evil things he had done. He also spoke of a ghost woman who attacked them, but the policemen looked at each other in doubt when he mentioned that. Still, they knew something terrible must have happened. The officers carefully lifted the shaken man into their van. With the sun rising, the police gathered more team members and headed into the forest, with the kidnapper leading the way. He pointed out the path, his eyes darting around in fear of seeing the ghost again. The police moved in, guns ready, not sure what they would find. The police officers found the camp after pushing through the woods. Morning light fell on a scene of carnage and sorrow. They discovered the remaining victims still tied to the trees, alive but weak and crying. The officers quickly untied the frightened people and gave them water and comfort. A few steps away, they noticed a patch of freshly dug earth, the grave of Ego. Gently they uncovered it and found Ego's body buried there, her face peaceful but pale, with her hands still protectively over her belly. The rescuers felt a pang of sadness and anger at the sight. Not far from Ego's grave, the police also found the bodies of the other kidnappers scattered around the campsite. The men's faces were frozen in expressions of pure terror. Their eyes were wide open, and their mouths hung ajar as if they died screaming. Yet there were no wounds or blood on them, which the police found very puzzling and eerie. The forest was eerily quiet as the officers took in the strange scene. The one surviving kidnapper sat in the police van with handcuffs on, rocking back and forth as he watched the officers work. He was the only one left of his gang. He should have felt lucky to be alive and caught by the police, but he couldn't stop shaking. Even surrounded by officers, he did not feel safe. A cold dread still clung to him, and he kept glancing over his shoulder. He thought about Ego and her ghostly face. The man closed his eyes, telling himself it was over now, but deep in his heart he felt a chill that would not go away. The police took the last kidnapper to the station in town. He sat alone in a small cell, wrapped in a blanket. A single light bulb hummed on the ceiling. He could finally catch his breath. An officer brought him some bread and warm tea. The kidnapper's hands were still shaking as he sipped the tea, but he started to believe he was safe now. Surely the ghost would not follow him here, he thought. Hours passed as the police processed paperwork and prepared to question him properly. Day turned into evening, and the station grew quiet. The man dozed lightly on a bench in his cell. Suddenly, he woke with a jolt. The air felt cold, and his breath made a tiny cloud in front of his face. It was strange. One moment he was warm under the blanket, the next he was shivering. The light in the cell flickered once, twice, then went completely out, plunging the room into darkness. The kidnapper's heart began to race. He could hear the faint sound of a baby crying somewhere, a sound that should not be there at all. His eyes darted around the dark cell. In the corner, a pale shape slowly took form. There stood Ego's ghost just inside the bars, with her white eyes glimmering in the dark. In her arms, the soft outline of her baby glowed. The kidnapper's throat went dry. "No, please," he whispered, backing up against the wall. The ghostly mother stepped closer, not making a sound. The man opened his mouth to scream for the guards, but in that instant, Ego's spirit reached through the bars with lightning speed. A cold, invisible force clamped around the man's neck. He gave a strangled choke. His eyes bulged and tears spilled down his face. He collapsed onto the floor of the cell with a heavy thud. Hearing the noise, the officers rushed to the cell and shone a flashlight inside. They found the kidnapper lying on the ground, lifeless. His face was twisted in fear, and his eyes stared at nothing. There was no sign of anyone else, and the cell door was still locked. The police were baffled and scared by what they saw. None of them could explain how or why the man died so suddenly. But in that cold, dark cell, Ego's vengeance had claimed its final victim. When Ego's family heard the news, they were heartbroken. Her mother and relatives traveled to the forest with the police to recover Ego's body. They gently dug her out from the hurried grave that the kidnappers had made. With great care and sorrow, they lifted Ego's body and brought her back to the village. According to their tradition, a mother and her unborn child should not share the same grave. So, even in their grief, the family followed the proper customs. The women of the family carefully separated the tiny unborn baby from Ego's body. It was a tragic sight, and many tears were shed as they prepared the two for burial. The village gathered to lay Ego and her child to rest. They dug two graves, one for Ego and one for her baby, side by side under an old oak tree. The local priest and elders said prayers and soft hymns. Ego's mother placed a small white cloth around the baby's body before it was buried, her hands trembling. Ego was buried with her favorite shawl wrapped around her, and flowers were laid on the disturbed earth. As the final handfuls of soil were thrown to cover the graves, the sun broke through the clouds, shining warm light on the clearing. It was as if the heavens themselves were sighing in relief. Now that the proper rites were done, Ego and her baby could finally rest in peace. Her angry spirit, which had risen to seek justice, was calm once more. The forest grew quiet and still, with no more shadows moving in the night. But the story of that frightening night lived on. Villagers would whisper around their fires about how Ego's love for her child gave her the strength to return from the dead. They talked about how she defeated the evil men who harmed her and saved the other innocents. It became a warning tale to anyone who would do such terrible deeds. In the end, Ego's vengeance was complete, and the spirits of the mother and child found peace. Yet the chilling memory of that night would never be forgotten. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe in other not to miss our next thrilling stories.